Hello, and welcome back to Go with the Flow. I'm your host, Shannon, and today we're going to be exploring some topics that a lot of students most likely think about often, but don't always want to talk about openly: plagiarism and procrastination. These two things can really get in the way of successful writing. Our main goal today is to help you understand what plagiarism actually is, why it happens, and how procrastination can sometimes make it worse. We'll also discuss strategies on how to avoid both so you can approach writing more confidently. I'm joined today once again by a few of our Writing Center mentors, Chris, Josh, and Chloe. Thank you so much for being with me again today. I always appreciate hearing your opinions and advice. So, for our first segment, we're going to discuss what plagiarism is. So, let's start off with the basics. Plagiarism is something that students always hear about. It's typically heavily highlighted in professors' syllabi at least once, but it isn't always fully understood. So, Josh, how would you describe plagiarism in your own words?
I would say plagiarism is the knowing use of another writer's work without giving proper credit or citation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe some students don't always realize that they're doing that. So, Chloe, what are some common misconceptions students might have about what counts as plagiarism?
I think a lot of the time, especially with the use of AI, I know that's something we talk a lot about. It's often thought about as just copying down what a source may say or what the ChatGPT might say, but there's a lot more ways that it's done that are a lot more subtle and that could be harmful.
Yeah, I agree. So, Chris, why do you think plagiarism sometimes happens unintentionally? And are students not informed enough? Is there anything that can be done to better inform them or prepare them for that?
One of the reasons why plagiarism might be done unintentionally by a student could be simply because they don't know how to properly cite the sources that they're using, or it could just be a lack of information regarding what constitutes plagiarism. In many cases, they might use a claim that they got from a source and think that it just doesn't need to be cited, when in reality, you pretty much need to cite every piece of information you're bringing up.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like a lot of students don't realize that even if they reword something, it's still not their own research, and they still need to give credit where credit is due. And I also think it's important to note that plagiarism doesn't always look like copying and pasting from the internet or a textbook. It can also be forgetting to properly cite sources like Chris said, and also reusing your own work from previous classes without permission from the professor or whoever's in charge. So we're going to move on to how procrastination can actually make plagiarism worse, because I find those two topics are closely related. Putting off work, especially writing, until the very last minute makes it more tempting to try and take shortcuts, which obviously will lead to plagiarism. So Josh, have you ever noticed how procrastination can lead to plagiarism? Whether it's from your own experience or from being a passive observer in a classroom. Have you noticed that with your peers or maybe students who've visited you in the Writing Center or anything like that?
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that with some of my peers. Sometimes they'll wait until the last minute to start on an assignment, and it doesn't even have to be writing related. Sometimes, like I said, they'll wait till the last minute and they'll feel the need to use ChatGPT to generate answers to whatever the assignment may be. So yeah, I would highly recommend not procrastinating. Getting started on an assignment early will definitely help give you the time that you need to actually do the assignment thoughtfully without plagiarizing.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll talk about some tips to avoid procrastination a little bit later on in the episode. But Chloe, why do you think that students wait until the last minute to get started on a writing assignment?
I know a lot of times it can be kind of that fear of not knowing what to say or how to write it. But I know also kind of just in our own personal experience as being college students, life gets in the way a lot. And we always kind of feel oh, well, I can just do that later. I have the time for it later. I don't have the time right now. And that leads to pretty bad habits of kind of putting it off. It's just difficult to kind of get ahead on it sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's almost impossible for college students to avoid procrastination. I can't imagine there's any one student who's never procrastinated at least once, it can be really challenging, especially when you are intimidated by the assignment. So, Chris, what does a last-minute writing assignment usually look like in comparison to one that a student has spent time on? And why does a rushed and last-minute assignment increase the chance of citation mistakes?
Okay, so generally when you're looking at a rushed assignment, you're going to have areas within that essay that aren't necessarily going to be fully coherent. So the writer may not have written it down with a plan in mind. And many times you can't really see like a direction, like in how they're trying to argue their point, or if they're doing a narrative experience, it may go like in different places because they kind of just word splurged onto the page. And when you're rushing through your paper to write it like that, in that way, a lot of the time you're going to have that difficulty to cite things correctly because you don't have a plan on sort of how to put it down on the paper. So you may try and cite it, and you can have sources that don't necessarily mesh with what you're putting in. And you can also have like information that you're trying to squeeze in to mesh that aren't necessarily part of like what the source itself is arguing. So in that case, I mean, it's not necessarily plagiarism, more like forgery. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree that not knowing exactly where you're going with a certain citation within your assignment can make it really hard to actually have the citation there properly. And I also think sometimes you get into the habit of writing citations a certain way, and then let's say you change formats all of a sudden, and you don't know what you're doing, and like that can also count as plagiarism when you improperly cite something on the page, and that can also be like a hard thing to avoid when you're not 100% familiar with different formatting options. So next we're gonna move on to avoiding plagiarism. So Josh, what is a good strategy for students to make sure they're properly citing sources?
Well, as a Writing Center mentor, I would recommend coming into the Writing Center if you feel like you are having trouble citing your sources. And we can always provide you help with APA, MLA, Chicago style, any formatting issues that you're having, we can try and help with. But if you feel like you need to tackle the issue on your own, then there are a variety of free resources that you can use to kind of help you through the process. So we have our own Lewis Online Writing Lab, or the Lewis OWL, that you can access. And there's a lot of great resources there about formatting in APA 7, MLA, Chicago style. And then there's also other online references like the Purdue OWL and, stuff like that. So if you can access all kinds of resources on the internet. Obviously, if you're going to use those resources, just make sure like you're double checking your work, so make sure it's accurate.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, the Writing Center is always here to help. And even if you can't always make time to spend a long time with us in the Writing Center, we do have physical copies of guides that can be really, really helpful when it comes to citations. I know they're helpful to me, and I know they're helpful to a lot of the students who visit me in the Writing Center. So, Chloe, how can students make writing citations a part of the actual writing process rather than a last-minute addition?
I typically, when I'm doing a paper where I need to cite my sources, I often keep a separate doc open where I put each source with each link and kind of just format it there. So that way, when I get to the end of my paper and I'm working on my works cited page, I kind of just copy and paste it into there. I find that to be very helpful. It lets me keep track of kind of all the sources that I've used, and it just makes the process easier, in my opinion.
Wow, I do think that's a great tip. I've definitely been in trouble with citations in the past or reference pages in the past where I just have so many sources that I do lose track of them. So that's actually a great tip that I might, include in my writing process from now on. So thanks for that. So Chris, how can visiting the Writing Center actually help prevent plagiarism as a whole?
Okay. Well, of course, there's the obvious answer of we'll read through the essay. And if we see anything that sort of looks like plagiarism, we'll point it out to you. Additionally, when you're like taking the time to actually go to the writing center, what you're doing is you're creating that plan, creating that organization to have like a more structured essay. And in doing so, you're going to remove a lot of the dangers that you have of just rushing through the essay and not having an idea of sort of what you're going to put in it. So when you're pulling from different sources, different information, we're going to give you the resources on how to cite that properly, on how to make sure that what you're using, the ideas that you're putting into your essay, are your own ideas.
Yeah, I agree. And I also want to say that I think there's a misconception about when is the appropriate time to visit the writing center. And I just want to mention that there isn't really an appropriate time. We can help with brainstorming and outlining just the same as we can help with like a final paper. We're just there to support you when you're writing, and sometimes it can be really helpful to spitball with another person about a topic that you're going to write an essay on, and it can actually genuinely help you get started. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons for procrastination, is just that people keep putting it off because they don't really know where to start. But the Writing Center can definitely help with that. So speaking about procrastination, once again, we are going to move on to how to beat procrastination. So Josh, what's one tip for students to get started early on in a writing assignment?
Well, obviously, get started as soon as possible. Sometimes that's a little easier said than done. You know, life gets in the way, school gets in the way, work gets in the way. So just learning how to manage your time effectively, if possible, maybe set aside half an hour in your schedule just to dedicate that time to getting started or working on some preliminary, like pre-writing, maybe doing some brainstorming, or, kind of doing a little bit of research about your paper, getting a better understanding of the assignment, maybe talking to your professor and getting that understanding. I think those are some ways you can kind of like break the habit and just get started when you need to.
Yeah, and I think it's important for students to remember that, like, quote unquote, starting a paper is not necessarily actually starting out like typing the whole thing all at once. Like, doing the research, just like Josh was saying, is just as important as the rest of the writing process. So just making sure that you have all your sources and such, like, organized in a way that's going to be easy for you to look at, I think can really be helpful when it actually comes to writing, because it's less intimidating to have it like laid out in front of you. So, Chris, how can breaking down one big assignment into smaller steps help reduce procrastination?
Okay. I mean, if you've listened to me before, I think my biggest thing has always been just organization. So being able to break down like an assignment into smaller steps kind of allows you to organize what sources you're going to use for which steps, and whether or not you even need someone else's like ideas or information like in each step. So kind of as I said before, being able to create that structure sort of removes the possibility of just you going through that incorrectly and not properly citing in the first place, because you know that you're going to need to properly cite it. You have the resources, and that's just how it ends.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I think helps me when it comes to like writing and taking assignments on is something that Dr. Concilio actually taught me my first semester at Lewis, is setting your own due dates for yourself that are like outside of professor due dates. And I think like if you can hold yourself accountable to those, then they can be really helpful. So if I have a paper due on a Wednesday, I'll tell myself I need to have everything done, like quote unquote done for it by Monday, so that I still have like extra time to go back and make edits, or hopefully like even meet with a peer or the professor if I need that extra support. So Chloe, speaking of accountability, what are some ideas of how students can hold themselves accountable for their own like writing timeline?
Definitely having that schedule written down somewhere where you will see it. I'm also in Dr. Concilio's class, and we do talk a lot about kind of making those personal due dates. And I think they're really helpful, especially not only when you're working like with a group or just by yourself, making sure that you have that at least written down somewhere. So that way, if you see it and you know the due date's coming up, you're kind of more inclined to following that schedule because you had already written it down. I think that's just one way of holding yourself accountable.
Yeah, I agree. Shout out Dr. Concilio for that great advice because I've really held on to it the last year. And then one other thing that I would say could be a good way for students to hold themselves accountable, and I know this could be really hard, but like say you have something due on a Monday and on Friday you are just not where you want to be with it. You have to be strict with yourself and just be like, okay, I'm not done with this, so I can't go out, or I can't like go see the new movie I want to see or something like that. You have to be strict with yourself in a way that's still kind to yourself because you are doing this for you. Like you want to get that assignment done, so you want to make sure that you're prioritizing that over outside distractions. So now we're going to move on to the role of the Writing Center as we always try to do. Chris, what are some ways that tutors can support students who tend to procrastinate?
Giving them advice specifically on just how to avoid procrastination altogether can be pretty helpful. Helping them get started with the actual writing process is good, but just as like a long-term benefit, giving ideas such as, something that I do is I have like a calendar on my wall where I write the assignments so that I have it there. I know that the assignment is due on this time, and so I have an appropriate amount of urgency because I know when everything is due. I know something that happens to a lot of students who procrastinate is that they sort of, they have the assignment sort of in the back of their mind, but they don't necessarily know when it's due. So they might find out that something is due the next day, except they've kind of been going through things as if they have like all the time in the world, you know? So the Writing Center can give like general advice like that, and we can also help you get started with your like writing process.
Yeah, I agree. And then one other thing that I think some students maybe don't realize that they can do or are aware that they can do, but students do have the ability to schedule regular appointments with the Writing Center where they can come and meet with the same mentor like weekly or bi-weekly just to keep updated on the things that they should be working on. And I think this is highly beneficial if you have like an assignment that you are supposed to do throughout the course of the whole semester, because that can get overwhelming and the due dates can like blindside you. So I think meeting with one of our mentors on a regular basis can really benefit students to avoid procrastination so that they kind of also have someone else holding them accountable and not just themselves. So I think like it can be really helpful. So Chloe, how early in the writing process should students come to the Writing Center?
I think honestly, even if you don't really have much of an idea what you want to do for that assignment, I think you should still come in. Like it's been mentioned quite a few times, but we do help with like brainstorming and kind of outlining. So even if your appointment is just bouncing ideas off of the mentor and kind of just like getting advice on that, I think that's very helpful to a lot of students. So I don't think it's ever like too early to come in. I think you're able to come in anytime, even if you don't really have anything set in stone yet, just to use that as an opportunity to get more ideas.
Yeah, 100%. And I've had students this semester come and only have a couple sentences or just an idea of what they want to work on with their assignment. And going back and forth with me and discussing the things that they need to get done and what they would like to get on the page has seemed to be really helpful to these students. And I'm happy to, give the support. And I'm sure all of my fellow mentors are also happy to give that kind of support. And I also just want to note that students should do their best to not only come when like the assignment is due the next day or in a few hours, just because they don't always have the time to apply any revisions and suggestions that our mentors might have. And I would want every student to get the most they possibly can out of a writing center appointment. And I feel like with such little time, they can't always do that. And I'm not saying like it's completely horrible if you come to the writing center when you don't have a lot of time to work, but I would definitely recommend trying to come a little bit earlier on in the writing process. Okay, so now we will move on to our weekly segment, Word of the Week. Josh will give us a word without the definition, and we have to guess its meaning, and hopefully we will be correct. Take it away, Josh.
So the word of the week is alacrity.
Alacrity.
Say that again?
Alacrity.
Alacrity?
Can you say it with more verve?
Alacrity.
There we go.
Is it a lack of clarity?
No.
Can you use it in a
Alacrity.
sentence?
Give me just a second. I had this written down.
He's like, no, I can't.
I
actually.
cannot do this.
Hmm.
So alacrity. At the writing center, we start appointments with alacrity.
Haste.
Gusto.
Gusto.
Friendliness?
We start appointments with alacrity.
Like hospitality,
Yeah, like
welcoming?
openness.
Yeah, I'd say you're pretty close.
Okay.
Alacrity. So it's close, but not exactly it. I don't know. Alacrity. I still have some guesses in me, but
Guess them.
see, because it's not hospitality, it's not openness, it's not friendliness. You said it's not friendliness.
No, I would say it's friendliness, but
Oh.
there's a little bit more to it.
It's more than
So
just
you're
friendly.
on the right track in terms of like hospitality and that kind of like feeling.
Mhm.
But there's a little bit more to it.
with like that feeling. I'm kind of sticking onto that word feeling.
Like, is it how we make a student feel or how we act?
I feel like it's more how the mentor would act, but maybe that kind of exudes and affects the writer in a positive way. Exudes.
Confident.
Maybe like
Or-
motivation, kind
Ooh.
of.
or,
No.
or like an excitement.
Oh, yeah. That's excited to write.
Are we ready for the definition?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to give you guys this one because you were really close.
Thank you.
So alacrity means brisk and cheerful readiness.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we were very close.
That's
Chris
me.
said
That's me.
Hayes. Yeah. I'm always like, hi, I'm Shannon.
Yeah.
Welcome in. Yeah,
like-
that's great. And I think
It's like they won't even have walked through the door, and I'll just be like, "Hey, how's it going?
how are you?
You
I
ready?"
think- I think it's great that I think everybody in the writing center is pretty good at that. Like being like, hello, welcome in. Like, and I love that. I love the energy. All right. So before we close today's episode, I want to remind our listeners that the Writing Center is here to support you through every stage of the writing process. You can make an appointment by visiting My Lewis and clicking the WC Online tab underneath Advising and Academic Support. You can also visit our online writing lab by visiting lewisu.edu/writing center. I also want to mention that we have some exciting and helpful events coming up this fall. Later this month, on October 29th, we will be hosting an annotated bibliography workshop at noon in the Writing Center. In November, we've got more opportunities to strengthen your writing, a literature review workshop on November 12th at 5 p.m. in the Writing Center, and an APA workshop on November 19th during Common Hour, also in the Writing Center. These are great opportunities to expand your knowledge or brush up on a writing style you haven't done in a while. Everyone is welcome, and we would love to see you there. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in this week, and of course, a big thank you to my guests for joining me in today's conversation. I encourage you to keep writing, keep revising, and never be afraid to reach out for help along the way. This has been Go With The Flow. Until next time.